There's so many things that we get told about mental health and like how to care for ourselves that are just straight up wrong, in my opinion. Like I feel frustrated with our modern medical system. And even one of the things, like I'm kind of going to get to some of the really big health challenges that I weathered through later, but just the fact, the body, mind, soul connection, the perspective of, oh, you have mental health issues, that's just a problem with your brain, is so tiny. That's like, I mean, we're looking at this huge problem through only a lens of the physical layer. I actually think that our systems are so wise. When we experience mental suffering, it is alarm going off.
Welcome to the Root Cause Reset, the podcast where we cut through the noise of symptom chasing and quick fixes and get to the truth about what's really going on in your brain and body. I'm Dr. Trish Schneider, a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner and functional bloodwork specialist. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Root Cause Reset, the podcast where we stop chasing symptoms and start asking deeper questions about mental health, healing, and the stories we've been told about what's possible. I'm Trish Schneider, and here we explore the root causes beneath emotional and physical struggles. Because when you understand the why, you can begin to heal the what. Today's conversation is a powerful one about reclaiming agency in mental health and exploring paths of healing that challenge conventional narratives. Today, I'm joined by Amber Cummings, a holistic mental health coach and founder of Mental Health Rebels. Amber's work is deeply informed by her own healing journey after spending more than 2 decades on psychiatric medications, followed by developing an autoimmune condition that affected her brain. Through studying transpersonal psychology, shamanic practices, and committing to her own daily healing work, Amber rebuilt her relationship with her body, mind, and spirit. Today, she helps others reclaim their freedom and power through perspective shifts, somatic practices, and spiritual connection. Amber, welcome to the Root Cause Reset. I would love to start with your story because it's incredibly powerful. You spent over 20 years on psychiatric medications before your health journey shifted dramatically. Can you share what that experience was like?
Absolutely. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you. Thank you for receiving my story. I started on psychiatric drugs when I was 12 years old. And it's really interesting how powerful the stories that we are told and that we accept become in our lives. When I was 12 years old, I had anorexia. I stopped eating, which, this is the root cause podcast. When I look back and think about the root causes of these things, I was living in a home where there was a lot of control. Anorexia is frequently with teenager girls. It's because there's no other things that you can control. And I actually think the things that I was struggling with as a teenager were pretty normal things. But in our modern medical system, you go to the doctor and you say, I'm upset, I'm depressed, I have problems, and doctors give big label diagnoses like, oh, well, then you have depression, you have anxiety, you have bipolar disorder. And I mean, we're talking about the 90s, right? Because I'm going to turn 43 next week.
You're a baby.
And so when I was a teenager, I was the 90s. And in that particular moment of time, I mean, psych drugs were like all the rage, like antidepressants. I mean, it was in the 80s that Prozac put out the marketing campaign that said that the cause of mental health issues is in a chemical imbalance in our brains, which has since been completely debunked. That is an absolute lie. Those drugs, antidepressants, benzos, and mood stabilizers actually cause a chemical imbalance in the brain. And I now am in a place where there's a piece of sacred rage inside of me when I think about this situation. But in the 90s, we all believed that chemical imbalances and something wrong with your body was the root cause of mental suffering. So that's what I was told when I was 12. It was, you have inherited the family illness, you have inherited the family crazy, and you are profoundly broken. Your brain is broken and you are going to need to be medicated for the rest of your life, basically. And at 12 years old, that the doctors telling me that, my parents telling me that, I believed that story and I accepted that story. And I proceeded to live the next 2 decades of my life as an absolute crazy person. I had an eating disorder. It was started with anorexia and it was bulimia. And I mean, that went on for many, for yes, the 2 decades. And I had hyperventilating panic attacks. I was in and out of the hospital. I had dysfunctional relationships, abusive relationships with both work and romances. I ended up being an alcoholic. I smoked. And it culminated in my early 30s in 2 suicide attempts, both of which were me taking large quantities of psych drugs, like bottles of pills, trying to kill myself, right? And it wasn't until after my second suicide attempt that I was like, hey, this isn't working. I've been taking these drugs for 2 decades and I keep getting worse and worse. In fact, I got so bad, I tried to kill myself. Like, there's a problem with this strategy. Something is off. And at that point in time, about 2010, I started doing yoga. I had been doing yoga for a few years, like sort of getting into it. But it was shortly after my second suicide attempt that I also had a hip surgery on my left hip. Now, having some shamanistic background training, I know that the left side is the feminine energy, our hips is the subconscious. I think that I was dealing with some very, very deep angst, soul existential suffering that had literally manifested into the 3D. And so my body got really broken between this. In the suicide attempt, I hurt my left shoulder, and in the surgery, that was my left hip. So I basically lost the use of the left side of my body for like 9 months. I could barely walk. I couldn't pick things up. It was really intense. And it was in that period of time, like I had to slow down. My system stopped and reconsider, reevaluate what I was doing. And I consider that to be like my real hit rock bottom, dark night of the soul. And at first, I didn't even want to continue being alive. I was really angry that my suicide attempts hadn't worked and that I was still around. But because I had hurt myself, I was like, well, I can't keep trying to kill myself and not succeeding because I could end up like disabled and in a really even worse place than this, right? And so I had this sensation like I was trapped in life. And Trish, the most powerful force in the universe is love. And what helped me get out of that really, really dark place was finally finding some love for my own self. I was in a yoga class because I was having all of these physical problems. I couldn't like do power yoga anymore, which I had done for many years. I was doing like these soft restorative yoga practices and I'm like cuddled up in the dark with my bolster. And the yoga teacher was talking about compassion and she was, and I'm sure that somebody had said like self-love before, that I had heard of this concept. But for some reason that day, I was listening to the teacher talk about self-love and compassion. And she said, could you just give yourself some compassion right now in this moment? And it hit. It like penetrated my wounded soul. And I went, oh my God, yes, I can give myself a little bit of compassion. I deserve that. And I began weeping in this yoga class. And I went home that day and kneeled in front of the mirror. And I looked in the mirror and I said, Amber, I am so sorry for how awful I've been to you. I've hated you all of my life. I had this awful internal voice. I used to say things like, when I did something wrong, I'd be like, Amber, you're such a screw up. You're so ridiculous. You don't even deserve to be alive. Of course nobody wants you. Of course you're all alone. Like, he said really mean things to myself every single day, all day long. Just this awful, critical, you're not worth anything. You are not valuable. You're a failure kind of voice. And I was like, Amber, I'm so sorry. I've been so mean to you. I was so mean to you. I have hated you so much that I tried to escape you by killing you. I mean, that's pretty serious. And I made a commitment that day to start taking care of myself. I was like, I'm going to be nice to you. I promise. So the very first thing I had to do was start working on that terrible voice. And instead, it took a long time. I'm not going to lie. It wasn't like you go from having an evil internal critic to being super sweet and loving overnight. But I began, instead of saying like, Amber, you're such a screw, I began being like, okay, self, that thing you did wasn't great, but I still love you. and you can learn from it. And you got this.
Wow.
And that's a really big difference.
That's an incredible story. That just, I don't know, that just blew me away. So when you hurt yourself on your left side, that was from the second suicide attempt? So was there like a physical like attempt, a jump or
Don't know because at that point in time I was a heavy drinker. So I had drank like 2 bottles of wine, and I remember kneeling on the ground and I had 4 bottles of pills. I had like at least 1 bottle of Klonopin. I mean, I should be dead because I definitely took a lethal dose of psych drugs and like a bottle of sleeping pills, bottle of Klonopin, bottle of antidepressants, bottle of mood stabilizers. And I remember all the pills on the ground and eating them, like drinking them with wine.
I think the
And
future Amber was watching over you. That Amber that
you
like
know what's wild,
spoke to
Trish?
you, I think she was watching over you.
So I work with psychedelics quite a bit now, and there have been multiple times in my journey. The very first psychedelic journey that I ever did was with LSD, and it was like Stanislav Groth style. We took the LSD, and I wore an eye mask for 8 hours in this like very deep ceremony. And I went back and I relived that event sitting next to myself. And for so many years after my suicide attempts, like suicide is seen as a pretty shameful thing. Like people in the United States, if you talk about suicide, even when I like on social media, if I use the word suicide for weeks after, Instagram will be like, someone thinks you need help. And it's like, if you even say that word, people are super blocked.
Yeah.
And so I thought that version of myself was incredibly shameful. And it was like I had done a lot of work trying to recollect the parts of myself, but I could not heal that part. I always was just like, I can't believe I did that. It went in the bucket of I'm such a failure. And when I went back in that psychedelic journey and sat next to myself, I realized that the energy of death is actually incredibly powerful. And what if if a person is suicidal, what if instead of seeing that as like bad, no, we just don't say that word, you need to go to the hospital. What if we go, no, it's because you actually need the energy of death in your life. You need to kill a version of yourself, not you, but that version of yourself needs to go. And in that suicide attempt, after that, I became profoundly different. It was after that I began questioning the paradigms that I had been handed about mental health. It was after that I began looking for new holistic ways of doing things. Like in that act, I killed a version of myself. And I definitely would not recommend that people, try and commit suicide. But I do think that feeling suicidal can be a massive call that there are things in your life that need to die, that there is radical, dramatic change needed. And so going back and looking at myself, I went, no, actually, that girl, the one who I think is so shameful and pathetic, she is the heroine of this story. That girl was brave enough to go to the darkest depths to get change, to declare I am done with the way things are and to start a new story. And when I began thinking of that girl, as giant of a mess as she was, as being the heroine of my story, she came back to me and I was able to reclaim her. And that power, that healing, that part of me is now here with me, creating vivacity and life force so that I can go forward and birth this new chapter, right?
Yeah. That's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So that the lowest low, that was, I mean, really, there's so many turning points in your story that really made you question the path that you were on. Like being told at 12 that you were going to be on meds forever, that this was it, that there was no turning back. Like, just to constantly be told, this is it. And there's, and even just the approach to mental health in general, the conventional way, it's just this, that doesn't, yeah.
There's so many things that we get told about mental health and like how to care for ourselves that are just straight up wrong,
Right.
in my opinion. I feel frustrated with our modern medical system.
Absolutely.
And even one of the things, like I'm kind of going to get to some of the really big health challenges that I weathered through later, but just the fact, the body, mind, soul connection, the perspective of, oh, you have mental health issues, that's just a problem with your brain is so tiny. That's like, I mean, we're looking at this huge problem through only a lens of the physical layer. I actually think that our systems are so wise. When we experience mental suffering, it is alarm going off. And like, I ignored that alarm for a long time. When you take psych drugs, they're a band-aid solution. They actually make it so you feel less, so you can't hear your alarm system. And I ignored that alarm system until it got to a place where it literally broke through, and I was in such a state of suffering that I ended up in a place where I was, like, trying to kill myself. Like, it shouldn't get to that point. We should be listening to our existential suffering far, far, far earlier before it becomes so awful that we wanna, commit terrible acts of self-destruction,
Yeah.
before it becomes a physical illness. Like, I love the work of Gabor Mate, who is now proving how many of the ailments that we have actually have roots in suffering. Like, he has all sorts of studies. The one that immediately comes to mind is how most women who have breast cancer have repressed voices. They have repressed anger. And I'm like, that's fascinating that you've done studies and it's so common. You can actually prove that there's a link between anger and this specific type of cancer. I mean, wow, right? And you think about, like, the things that I was suffering from. Talk about, decades of suppressing my feelings, and I finally ended up with massive health issues, right? I mean, first of all, the hip.
Yeah.
Should I keep going
Yes.
in my story here?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, okay.
Absolutely.
So after we get through the suicide attempt, and thank God I made it. I was unconscious for 48 hours. It is an absolute miracle that I'm alive. And at some point in that time, I blacked out because I took all those pills. I mean, it's pretty obvious why. But when I woke up, I had this big cut on my eye. And so I figure I must have gotten up and fallen and hit my head. And I probably had whiplash because my left shoulder stopped working. I had what's called scapular dyskinesia, which is when your shoulder muscles stop working together and your scapula, like the big muscle in
Yeah.
the back of your shoulder, it just went out and like turned in this weird way that
Oof.
that a bone should never do.
Ooh.
And it was really, really painful. So that, and then the hip surgery, my hips were rubbing together in the wrong way. And I ended up with a tear in my labrum and a cyst on the bone. And so it was like a big operation to get all of that aligned. I made it through all of that. And in the time where I was, kind of homebound and unable to really go anywhere, like that was the soul searching time. And I remember reaching a place where I was like, that is it. This level of suffering is just unacceptable. I cannot go on. I have to do something to try and cheer my own self up. And I began brainstorming things, and I ended up actually taking Spanish classes, which was very sweet. And I went into San Francisco on crutches, trying to go to my lessons. And the woman who was the Spanish teacher, she was from Spain, and she was just this vivacious lady full of life. And I'm telling you, she was better than I was always seeing a therapist, but she was better than any therapist. I had lived in Granada in a study abroad program. And so she began getting me to tell her these stories about times in my life where I was living in so much more just joy and pleasure. And it was like something woke up inside of me. It helped me remember a spark. And that catalyzed me forming a Spanish language book club in the Bay Area, which is a really diverse area. And in order to read a book in Spanish, like your language level has to be pretty high. And so all of these expats from all of the over the world began coming to my book club. And I had people from Spain and from Argentina and from Mexico and from Peru. And they were so cool. And I've always been kind of a weird misfit. And it was like, these are my people.
Fun.
And here I am now, right? Like
Right.
I ended up eventually after like 2 years of doing yoga and some holistic healing and this and that. That book club helped empower me to take the leap and leave the United States again. It was the third time that I became an expat. I had lived in Spain and then I lived in Argentina for 2 years, which are other story. I got a lot of stories. But then I left again. And, part of the reason that I left the United States was I was working in San Francisco, hustle culture, tech companies, ad agencies. And it was like, my life, even though I'm describing myself as being a giant mess, but I was actually quite functional. I had a good-looking job at Fitbit and worked on the 49th floor in downtown San Francisco, and I wore high heels, and I had my commuter car and my shoe collection, and everything. I bought $20 cocktails. Like, technically, it was what our United States says success is supposed to look like. But I was so miserable. It just felt completely empty. And I was like, I want to live with more heart and more soul. And when I committed to start taking care of Amber, I realized, well, dude, what does Amber want? Amber does not want to go to that stressful job anymore. She doesn't even care. She doesn't care about how much money is in her bank account. What she wants is connection.
Yeah.
She wants to live her life with more heart and soul. And so when I tore down my life in the United States, what I was really looking for was a deeper level of connection. And as time has gone on, I actually believe that's one of the number one root causes of mental health suffering is that we humans right now are massively disconnected. We are disconnected from ourselves. We are disconnected from others. We are disconnected from nature. We are disconnected from the divine. And that's what we humans crave the most, is to be connected. And I didn't even know how to do it. Like, I was in a place where I was so hard and tough and city girl that I couldn't pull off my mask and connect to other people's hearts. It has been a big, long journey for me to be able to look people in the eye and give hugs that are full heart and full soul and sit on my grass and be able to vibrate with the all. But now that I can do that, my life on the outside, I don't have nearly as much money. I don't have nearly as much things or stuff like from regular standards. I'm definitely not as successful, air quotes, but I am fulfilled. I'm living with depth and love and connection now.
That's great.
And so I left. Yeah. So I left San Francisco and I went to Bali to a yoga teacher training. And I was in such a state. I began having hyperventilating panic attacks every day. And I ended up dropping out of the yoga teacher training. I am a yoga teacher training dropout. True story. And I ended up just crying in the jungle for a couple of weeks. But the cool blessing is that's when I started chanting mantras. And I had a friend in the yoga teacher training say, oh my gosh, you had all those problems with the left side of your body. There must be an imbalance in your feminine energy. And I was like, well, duh. But what am I supposed to do about that? And she was like, why don't you pick a goddess and start chanting to her? And I did that, and immediately things began to move in my life. Stuff started happening, like good things, bad things. I dropped out of the yoga teacher training. It wasn't like it was just all sunshine and rainbows, but it was like something woke up inside of me, and I began chanting mantras. And that was when I created a daily practice. So we're going to zoom all the way back to me being a child and having all of these mental health problems. I grew up in a home where I was modeled dysregulated behavior. No one taught me that I could calm myself down. I thought that the way to handle things when I was upset was to freak out and have a panic attack because that's the only way you could get anybody to pay attention to you. And so I had grown up believing that I was a victim of my own mental health issues, and that at any time when I had no idea, a panic attack could arrive and just bowl me over. I didn't realize that, well, actually, I get triggered for reasons. I have coping tools. I can calm myself down. But it was through chanting mantras that I began rewiring my system and learning to find a place of calm. And now I have a very regular meditation practice. I work with my clients on coping techniques. I try and tell everyone this, there's things you can do. You are not a victim of your crazy. You can calm yourself down. But it took me a long time. I mean, I was mid-30s before I figured that out, right? And after that, I arrived in Mexico, where I began working with this incredible shamana, transpersonal therapist, who I later did my own transpersonal and shamanism training with. And it was that woman, her name's Paola Ambrosi Sanchez. She is one of my mentors and guides, someone I deeply respect and love. She was like, Amber, you don't have to be taking all these drugs. I was like, what? Because I still, even after doing all that work and looking for holistic coping tools and yoga and blah, 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 I still thought that I would have to be medicated for life. Like in the United States, there was no doctor
Yeah.
that would have told someone with a story like
Yeah,
mine,
and
oh, you can get off those drugs.
exactly. Many
Ludicrous.
people feel afraid to question psychiatric treatment because they're told it's their only option.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that's
Totally.
it. They're told it's meds or meds and therapy, and like there's nothing else. You're right.
Exactly. Well, I wanted to know who I was without all those drugs because I had been medicated my entire life. And so I ended up doing the leap and detoxing off all those drugs, but I did it way too fast. I didn't know better. You know, doctors had told me so many times over my life, like, oh, just taper down for a couple weeks off that one drug, go on this other drug, like blah, 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 blah. And in retrospect, I'm like, wow, no wonder I had so many problems because I tried so many different drugs. I'm like, I had withdrawal, awful withdrawal so many times, and nobody knew what was going on. They just acted like I was crazier and crazier, you know? It's just, it's very, it's disturbing when you like go back and look and you go, what I was told was so incorrect. But, you know, I didn't know better. So I tapered off 3 drugs. I was taking an antidepressant, well, excuse me, Wellbutrin, an antidepressant, Lamictal, a mood stabilizer, and Klonopin, which I had been taking for 18 years daily. Benzo tranquilizers are notorious for bad withdrawal, difficult withdrawal, I'm going to say. And I did just 3 months taper of all of those, and I had incredibly gnarly, terrible withdrawal. I mean, I was basically bedridden for about 3 months. I could barely get out of bed. My bones ached. It was like they had to get out of every cell of my being. And, you know, a lot of people would have just gone back on the drugs. But when I had such terrible withdrawal, there was something in me that was like, oh my God, I cannot believe what these drugs were doing to me. There's no way that I'm going to go back to taking them. Like for me, the withdrawal created this block where I was like, hell no, not going back there. I think that, you know, however people handle it is perfect. Everyone's got their own story. Now I have been working with the Inner Compass Initiative, which is a website that has free information about how to do a safe taper and withdrawal. And I would really, really recommend that as an amazing resource for anyone that's going through a process like that, because there's what's called safe hyperbolic tapering. And there are ways to do that that are so much more loving and gentle. And, you know, that caused me suffering for the next 7 years. I recommend now, I'm like, even if it's a really slow taper and it takes you 7 years, that is better than the total roller coaster ride I'm about to describe here, right? So I am not recommending that people do what I did, but here we are. This is my story. So I didn't go back on the drugs. I like just weathered through the withdrawal. And after like 6 months, I started to be a little more stable. I was able to start working again. After 9 months, I was like starting to feel like myself. And after a year, I mean, I was like, wow, I can't believe it. I feel better than I ever had in my life. I started sleeping for the first time. I had all these tools because I had been doing energy work practices. I was like way better than I believed was even possible for someone like me. I began leading kirtan events, which is a practice of chanting mantras and spiritual things in my community, et cetera, et cetera. I launched Mental Health Rebels, my company. I wanted to help other people get off psych drugs too. And then I started having these weird health collapses where I would just get really dizzy and tired and low energy. And I was like, what's wrong with me? And it's interesting now being a spiritual person because I had some like spiritual guilt, like, oh, I must not be communing with God correctly or singing enough mantras or doing enough yoga because I'm you know unhappy and I'm tired and it must be that I don't know there's like I had a lot of stories about it, but it just got worse and worse. And after a couple years, I couldn't no longer lead events. I was quite unwell. I tried to go traveling and was just so sick. It wasn't even fun. I ended up hiding in the mountains in Peru for a while. And I was like, okay, you know, the nature is going to be better for me. So when I got back to Mexico, I'd been living in Mexico City. I moved to the mountains where I am now and like made this very small, safe life for myself where I was able to, you know, just do the bare minimum. I had a marketing job that was paying my rent. I had like very few clients I was in just surviving and I felt awful and it just seemed to get worse and worse and worse. And I was to the point where I could barely walk down the street. I'd lost oral tolerance. I was basically allergic to all food. I couldn't really work out. Just I couldn't see. It was really, really difficult. And I finally, after just praying on my knees, I mean, I will say there's some miracles in my story. And even though this stuff was really tough, I do feel like the divine was holding my hand and watching me and there for me. And I kept praying on my knees. I was like, something is so wrong. And I saw many doctors and many healers. And I was like, God, help me.
Yeah.
January 1st, well, New Year's Eve, at the end of 2023, January 1st, 2024, met Dr. Greg Global, who is my hero. And he and I met at a bonfire and he was like, oh, you chant mantras? Me too. And we became friends and we began singing mantras together. Like mantras have been really lovely for my story, as you can tell.
Yeah.
And he's a functional medicine doctor. So as we became friends, he was like, no, this is not normal. This is not okay. He had me do autoimmune testing in the United States and some additional tests as well to see about my blood-brain barrier. And what we discovered is that unsafe, too fast detox off the psych drugs left me with a traumatic brain injury. The same kind of traumatic brain injury that, football players get. But I didn't get hit in the head by a football. I got hit in the head by psych drugs. And that had evolved into an autoimmune condition in my cerebellum, which is the part of your brain most affected by alcohol and benzos. And I had really abused my cerebellum. So that makes a lot of sense. And so that was why I felt so dizzy. And I was actually losing, your cerebellum controls your ability to walk and talk. I was losing my motor motion abilities. If we hadn't found that out, I would have gotten worse and worse and worse until I would have been in a wheelchair with dementia. Like it was very serious. This is not like a light, fluffy kind of condition.
That's wow. Yeah. That's
You know
brilliant.
what's crazy too? As I lived through that, I actually feel like being unwell in that way, I began seeing stars all the time. It connected. I feel like I was in the cave where I was very unwell and I didn't know what was going on, but I was very quiet, like I couldn't do much. And I actually think there was some beautiful spiritual connection that I developed during that time. Like I didn't see the way you normally see. Like everything was stars and dots. It was almost like I could see the ether. And as time has gone on, like I began seeing people's auras and I realized mm, how there's this thing in Hindu mythology called the Maya. And the Maya is the veil of illusion. And when we come to planet Earth as souls, we agree to the Maya that we will forget who we are and where we came from and believe that this is it. And I believe during that time, it was like I could see the Maya and I understood that there was something bigger beyond just this life. And my connection to the divine deepened greatly. And I began feeling things in a different way and developing my spiritual faculties and connecting with my body in a really special way. And my body has been such an incredible teacher on this journey. She knows all the answers, and she's been trying to talk to me since I was 12 years old. And now that I finally started listening to her, she has so much to say.
Yeah.
So Dr. Greg and I, we began trying to do holistic healing, supplements, diet, sleep, exercise. That's all great stuff. And like, I got better. I was a little more stable, but I was so far from the ideal state. I was really still, after 9 months, in survival mode. And I got invited to speak at Qualia, the first psychedelic conference here in Mexico. And I got to talk to all of these psychedelic experts. And I had iboga enter the scene for me. I met some people there who worked with iboga, and then I met a facilitator who did ibogaine treatments here in the Mexican mountains in Tepoztlan. If people don't know what iboga is, it's a sacred psychedelic root from Africa. That's what I'm going to say as a Westerner, but if you asked someone, a Bwiti, the traditional culture from Africa who serves that medicine, what is iboga, they would say it is a spirit. And I also, after working with that spirit for a long time now, I agree. It is a force, it is a spirit, it is a root, it is a tool for us humans as earth creatures. I truly believe that it is our right, our destiny, our privilege as earth beings to work with other earth spirits, to work with plants. They're here to be our friends. And Ibogaine is just one of the alkaloids in iboga. So iboga is a really complex, incredible root. It's got over 22 psychoactive alkaloids, which are these chemical substances that have an effect on our bodies. So they pull out just the ibogaine. Ibogaine became famous because it has the power to interrupt addictions. So people who are on heavy duty drugs like opioids, it can stop the withdrawal process and give them an opportunity to get off those drugs. The thing that's really cool, though, is they're discovering that it can do far more. Most psychedelics, like ayahuasca or mushrooms, for example, psilocybin, they light up a couple more receptors in your brain. The ones that I just mentioned light up your serotonin receptors. And so they're consciousness expanding substances. They help your brain make connections and see more information in a way that you don't have access to in the regular waking state. Ibogaine, or iboga, lights up over 12 different receptors in the brain. One of those is the opioid receptors, which is how it helps people get off opioids. Nicotine, it can also help people get off nicotine or quit smoking, right? And there's quite a few other ones, but because it activates so many parts of the brain, you get this incredible expanded consciousness state. And it's technically not a psychedelic. Like, when you think about psychedelics, you think about these like crazy cool patterns that happen. It's
Yeah.
called a disassociative. And so one of the things that's really cool about doing an ibogaine session, if you take a big dose, a flood dose that we would call it, it takes your brain into REM sleep state. And so what normally happens is lots of content and material comes up from the subconscious. And people will often relive events. I've had this happen, and most people who have a flood dose, it's really common. People report reliving traumatic, difficult events from their life, but having this like distance from it,
Mm.
where you can see something really painful, where normally that would create a trigger and you would get really upset if you really like felt
Yeah.
that trigger in regular life, right?
Yeah.
But because of this dissociative effect, you see that thing and you don't get triggered. So you can explore it. And people are able to make new connections and do healing work in that container in a way that they aren't normally capable of doing. So that's one of the other ways that it helps people with addictions or people who have PTSD, heavy duty trauma, is it can help them see life events and make new connections and rewrite their story. Just like I was talking about, where I've been able to go back and change the story of my suicide attempt into being something that it is life-giving, that helps me, that makes me stronger, that creates power as opposed to something that was a failure, air quotes, right?
Mhm.
Ibogaine helps people do work like that. So I find out about Ibogaine, and my Dr. Greg was like, Amber, you should do it. It can heal traumatic brain injury. I was like, really? And Trish, this is another thing where so the modern medical system says traumatic brain injury, autoimmune disease, those are non-curable conditions, basically band-aid solutions from, medicine. Like the stuff that they're going to give you for that is just practically useless and almost only side effects. Like
Right.
there's not much that the modern medical system will do for those kinds of conditions.
Right.
You're just kind of screwed, unfortunately. And so this is another place where I want to be like, hey, universe, hey, world, that also lie.
Yeah.
Mother Nature has tools for us. And I think it is not a coincidence that right now we are living this moment where humans are insanely sick. We are insanely disconnected. People, we've got AI, artificial intelligence. People don't even have to think for themselves anymore, right? This like very disconnected state where we are very, very unwell and disconnected from our bodies. And all of a sudden, psychedelics are getting popular. Like people are turning to these substances because we've gotten to such a desperate state that we need radical solutions. We need big help. We need leap me off to the stars, ibogaine kind of support now. So they pull out just the ibogaine and they can do a flood dose. And it does need to be done in a clinical setting because there's some counterindications for people who have heart conditions. For example, it can be dangerous if someone has a heart condition. So it's a journey that needs to be accompanied by professionals, medical professionals. And so I went ahead and did 2 flood doses with ibogaine. And oh my gosh, I could talk about the visions and the things that I saw for hours more. But I think for the sake of the story here, What's really important is that quantum leaped my brain healing. Like, I went from a place where I was just scraping from the bottom of my cup in total survival mode, like barely able to function, to all of a sudden having my life force restored, having the nectar of my being, the Amarit. The Amarit in Hindu mythology is the nectar that makes you immortal, right? And so, like, having my own life force back to me, it's like I'm the woman you see now. Yeah, I get to
Amazing.
be vivacious and joyful, and it was just so amazing. And in that, oh my gosh, in my visions, Ibogaine has a sense of humor. A lot of people report have it like being very funny. I had these frogs, these like rainbow colored magical frogs that were full of orange nectar. And I could heal anything with them, but in order to do it, I had to just smash the frog. And so in my visions, there were all these visions that I had where I like visited. It was like I was in Zoom, like inside my body, going and like trying to fix things. And I would like smash these rainbow colored frogs full of orange nectar and heal myself with them. And then I saw that they like live in my sacrum, and there was this orange waterfall in the jungle that was covered with psychedelic rainbow frogs, just all
Wow.
this beautiful stuff. But I see that often, and I often meditate with that vision now of like this waterfall of life force nectar that is what I have to give to the world. So after that, I continued working quite a bit with Iboga microdosing. There's a wonderful company that I work with here in Mexico called Root and Ritual that makes Ibogaine, or sorry, Iboga microdose chocolates. And then I work with Casawell that does Ibogaine flood doses. So I'm currently training now to be an Ibogaine flood dose facilitator. We're doing retreats here in Mexico, and I'm working with Root and Ritual to accompany other people microdosing. It's really, really cool that people can achieve major brain healing without going through like a flood dose is a big experience, right?
Yeah.
But 3 months of a microdose protocol, for example, people can achieve a lot of physical 3D brain healing. Plus, you get that expanded consciousness state. So people are often able to do a much like lighter, more gentle, working through their traumas and things that come up during their day to day. And so that's really helpful, like working with a coach. And I really, really enjoy doing those journeys. So I guess I'll just like end my story by saying, this is a crazy wild story. Nobody wants to spend years and years on psych drugs and being
Mhm.
crazy and go through all this chaos and drama and then, get off the drugs but have stinking autoimmune disease and a traumatic brain injury and blah, 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 blah. And yet I would not change a thing. I believe that I had to go through all of that to collect the medicine that I am meant to offer to humanity now. And to be able to do conversations like this, where I say, what they are telling us is an incomplete story. There's so much more possible, especially when we pray on our knees and connect to the all and let life guide us to the solutions and activate our own healing medicine. Because everyone comes with everything that they need already inside of them in order to do their sacred mission here on planet Earth.
Mhm. Yeah. It sounds like, you pretty much definitely view the mind body connection. It changes how you view healing. And, uh, and it sounds like the somatic and energy based practices have definitely become part of your recovery. Is that something that you also share with your clients? Do you have like this overall like whole package where you do the mind body, the energy based practices and all of these things with your clients and help them move through like
For sure.
stored at, like what I find is that many people in their healing journeys that they have their emotional pain often lives in the body as well as in the mind. So do you help them with that too when they come to you and they do have the physical pain and then you find out a lot of it is emotional or trauma that sort of, has lived in the body, sort of work through some of that as well?
Yeah. So for me, there's 4 things that I do with clients when we're doing a coaching container. One is energy work practices, which for me, I actually have a list of all sorts of different energy work practices. I'm happy to, if we can figure out a way, I'd be happy to gift that too. any listeners today. And there's so many things that we can do to move our energy with intention, whether that is yoga or breath work or chanting mantras or doing meditation or writing in your journal or doing art or getting your butt up and doing some dancing or breath work. Like there's just I know people who really connect to Qigong, or there's things I haven't even tried that are on the list. Some people like theater. But it's disconnecting from the rational mind all the time and moving all of this stuff through our systems. And what I find is people who are us Westerners often have just all this stuck emotion and energy. Emotion is energy in motion, right? So if we haven't been processing our emotions, they get stuck. They're like stuck in our throat like a ball of rage, or right?
Yeah.
Some people need to use their voice, like do some screaming. Yeah. I talk to people about intentional states of catharsis, instead of waiting to freak out and get angry, like, can you just go ahead and yell into your pillow instead and like get it out at the beginning of the day? So usually one of the first things that I do with clients is see if they are game down to do a daily practice, because when we do a daily practice, we are training our brain how to return to calm. And I believe that if I could pick for a person, I would prescribe 30 days of a daily practice over one ceremony any day. We chase these peak experiences, and that can be really transformational, going to ibogaine flood dose or whatever. Yes, absolutely. Awesome. But I think what really, really changes you before and after, or just on its own, is sitting down and training your brain and connecting to yourself every single day. Because that's when things come up. That's the moment that you are connecting to that wise voice, your soul, the part of you that has all the answers. If you never stop and listen to that voice, it can't tell you where to go. But when you listen, you have this guidance system, right? And so energy work practice, and then what I call mindset makeover, which is, listening to people. One of the things, I'm going to give an example of one that's really, really common. People think that they're victims. They're mad. They're mad at what has been done to them. Yes, I have got that story too, my friend. The injustices that have been done to me. When I was 12 years old, I got put on psych drugs and it ruined my life. That can be my story. That I could just be pissed. My parents at the doctors, blah, 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 blah. But I do not choose that story. I believe that my soul picked this crazy curriculum because it is my journey this lifetime, and I'm going to go ahead and claim it all, my mess and my magic, and I'm going to do something with it. And so instead of thinking that you're a victim, can you take radical responsibility for everything that's happening in your life and look for the opportunities to be found? You can do something with all of this. The most incredible people that I know have horrific stories, almost all of them. It's that walking through the fire makes you amazing.
Yeah.
So mindset makeover, like, how are we going to look at this? You change your story, you change your life, and you have all the power in the world to change your story because it is yours. It's just about how you tell it. And then what I call mental freedom, which is unshackling the mind. And we have all sorts of things that shackle our mind: traumas, crappy programming. This is like a subconscious, deep in there kind of stuff. This is where we work on trauma, what I call soul diving. And so how do you get into the subconscious? Talk therapy, people go through a lot of talk therapy and don't get very far because it's the rational mind. But we humans, we run on subconscious programming 95% of the time. So if all you're working on is that 5% rational mind, well, you might be in therapy for decades like I was. It wasn't until I started doing these deeper experiences that I could get into the subconscious. So all the energy work practices, those things help us get into the subconscious. And then psychedelic journeys are really, really helpful for accessing the subconscious. And once you get into those states, what we're looking for is, what is your programming? So normally this comes up for clients, like we look at people's triggers when people get really upset and they have a hard day. And it's like, your triggers are your treasure. Within that is the stuff we got to work on. And so there is some analysis of like, okay, well, what is triggering you? What's going on? And then there's a lot of introspection where the person needs to go in and talk to their inner child who is running the show. It's the 0 to 7-year-old self that is the subconscious. It's like we got to take the inner child by the hand and go soul diving for those treasures.
Yeah.
So I help people through that. And that's
Great.
that's like the harder part, right?
Yeah.
But it can be exciting if we choose to look at it that way. And it's really exciting when you start freeing yourself from that stuff. It's worth it work. And then the fourth thing that I do with my clients is what I call joyful living. And joyful living is deciding to be delighted. It is a choice to enjoy it. Because I can go through my day and notice all the things that are wrong, and there are plenty of things that are wrong. But if I decide to be delighted by eating a piece of chocolate with my coffee in the morning, and I am absolutely over the moon happy that my cat chose to sit on my lap for a little while. And when I get in the shower, I sing a song and do a little dance because that feels good. And I make fun plans with my friends. And, like I take a nap because I love napping. I mean, there's so many little things that we can do to make life yummy and delighted. Like, can you stop being so grumpy and just stop and notice that there's a big fat rose blooming in your yard? What if you just stop and be awestruck by how gorgeous things are sometimes?
Yes.
So that one right there, I feel like people really fight me on that sometimes. Like, no, especially depressed, grumpy people. I work with a lot of people who are really suffering and having a hard time. And they're just like stuck in how awful things are. And I'm like, I know that if you try, you can find something to be grateful for. Like, you have electricity in your house. Do you know how cool that is?
Yeah.
Do you know how awesome it is that you have hot water? That's cool. Did you think about that today? It's awesome.
Yes.
You have a body. Literally, when we come to planet Earth, we get a body. That's the greatest gift we ever have as humans. If your body is working, my God, you have something to be joyful about.
Yeah, it's amazing. The little thing. We got to stop and think about it. So, Amber, this is the
Yes.
question that I ask every guest on the podcast. If you could reset one belief that people have about mental health or healing, what would it be?
I think that I would love to say that having mental health struggles is not bad. I don't really believe in good and bad anymore. That challenge can be the catalyst for an incredible healing journey that frees you, where you discover the profound jewels and gems in the depths of your complex, gorgeous being. And so I would love to reframe that mental health struggles are a problem and instead have people see that as an opportunity to tune in to their being and go on a treasure hunt with their inner child, of course, but go on a treasure hunt to figure out what you need and what your soul, your body, your system is trying to tell you. I firmly believe that most people, like the labels that we are given about mental health, most of them are pretty meaningless. They're labels that the system gives us so that they can give us a diagnosis and then they can treat us with some sort of substance. It's so much bigger than that. So if we could stop looking at that as bad, like a medical condition that needs to be treated with a psych drug, and instead be like, hey, my system's talking to me. There is a call here for more, for an exciting journey that's going to free me and unlock a new chapter in my life. Like, that perspective, I believe, would change everything.
That's great. Amber, thank you for sharing your story so openly. What I hope listeners take away from this conversation is that healing journeys can look very different for different people. And sometimes the most powerful step is reclaiming your own curiosity about what your body and mind truly need. If you'd like to learn more about Amber and her work with mental health rebels, we'll include her information in the show notes. Thank you for listening to the Root Cause Reset. And remember, when you know the why, you can begin to heal the what.
I'm Dr. Trish Schneider, a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner and functional bloodwork specialist.